So in this video, we're going to be looking at basic hangma. This is a video geared for beginners, and we're just going to talk about the 6 types of basic movement or hangma. I'm not even really going to call them shapes because they're really more like movements. So if we have a stone, the idea is from a stone, how do we move, so to speak, meaning how do we go to a new place from our previous stone? And the thing that we want to think about is if we go too far, we can get cut. And usually we don't want to get cut unless it's very well planned. So I'm just going to keep it within the scope of fairly, you know the rules, you know how to capture stones, you know what eyes are. So we're just going to move to, just trying to take from one stone, how do we go to our next stone? And so this is the 6 basic movement patterns. First 2, we have the stretch or the nobi. This obviously cannot be cut because there's no space in between the 2 stones. Very simple. Second pattern, kosumi, diagonal move. Can this be cut? In practice, there are special cases where it can be cut. But if you're a beginner, you'll learn those as they come up, but generally cannot be cut. Why? Well, there's 2 points, A and B, which we call miyai. Miyai meaning 2 points that meet each other. So if one is taken, the other can be taken, and they'll just be in exchange. They're even. So if white takes A, for example, we could try to capture the stone. We can do a lot of stuff. But worst case, if we wanted to stay connected, we just connect on the other side. And now these are all connected. Same thing with B, right? It's the symmetrical position, so we can just connect. The nobi and the kosumi are the 2 most solid shapes that in general cannot be cut. However, they are very slow. They are the slowest shapes. Let me show you. Let's say that we are playing a game, and I'm only going to be making, nobis and kosumis. And my opponent, they're just making these one-space jumps, right? Maybe I even go up a little. I'm a little adventurous. Maybe white goes up a little, right? Oops, that's not one. Right? But eventually, you can kind of see that white is, well, that doesn't make sense, but white is starting to take over more of the board, right? And that's because white is moving faster. So we don't want to just not be cut. We want to be able to cover. We want to be able to move through space in such a way that we can cover more of the board. So just making kosumis and nobis very strong. Sometimes we need to do that. We need to be strong. But sometimes we need to be faster. So how can we be faster? Well, the 2 most common shapes, the one-space jump and the knight move, these are the 2 shapes that strike the best balance between speed and strength. So in a neutral position, these are the kind of moves that you're generally going to look for first. Now, you might say, well, there you have a one-space jump. Why can't I just cut this? Well, okay, let's say, how do we cut this? Let's ask ourselves that. Well, if we play any move at all, right, black can just play here. And look, it's a nobi, and then another nobi. So there's no way to cut this. In any move we play, peep, connect, attach, maybe there's better answers, begin tiger or whatever, but let's say we just connect, it cannot be cut, right? So the only way we can cut this is if we take that spot ourselves, we wedge. And now notice something. If we wedge, well, the wedging stone only has 2 liberties. It's very, short on liberties. It's almost dead. So we can Atari from either side as black. We get to choose whichever way is better for us. And then we have 2 cutting points. And we can choose whichever one we think is better to defend, right? Depending on the situation. So we have a few choices here. So white has to meet a lot of conditions in order for this cut to be successful. White has to both be okay no matter which way we Atari. And then white has to be able to create a good fight no matter which way we connect. That's a lot of conditions to meet. And I'll just point out, they're very hard to meet in practice. So for example, let's say I have a one space jump on the edge. I want to cut this, right? But I can just Atari it down to the edge, and these two stones, they're not going to go anywhere. Eventually, they're going to be captured. Now, you may not recognize that this is captured, and that's okay. But I'll just tell you, 6 in a row is dead. 6 in a row means 6 stones on the second line is dead. That's a video for another time, but it's good to know. The general way you want to attack your opponent's stones, at least close to the edge, is push them down to the edge. We can even connect here too, but push them down to the edge and then have them crawl along it until they get to 6. If they get to 6, if you can Hana, you can kill, but if you can't, that's okay. They get roughly less than 10 points, maybe 8 points, and you get a giant wall. So if you get this wall is worth more than 8 points, that's great. For example, here, this is already 6, maybe 9, depends on how you count it, 9 points just in this space. And we can still build. So usually crawling on the second line, yes, AlphaGo, there's a few places where crawling on the second line is good, but generally it's still not the best thing. And so in practice, when we're close to the edge, yeah, it can't really be cut. We just push it down, right? Now, that's the general case. All of these have exceptions. That's actually, in some sense, the word tesuji. You can just equate that with exception, special case, special move, right? That's how I would think about tesuji. It's a special case. It's a special move. Normal case, just push it to the side. Okay, so one space jump creates a fight. Actually, anytime your opponent tries to cut you, it's going to create a fight. And but the reason these are good shapes is there's something about them that makes it so the fights are usually good for you. In the case of the one space jump, it's very hard for white to be okay with all the conditions, being okay with either Atari and either protecting move, right? Being able to be okay with this fight and this fight, or this fight and this fight. That's actually really hard to do in a game of Go, to meet all those conditions. And if you're aware and you get familiar with these, you might be like, oh, all those conditions are met. White spends a lot of moves trying to set this up, and you're just like, maybe I'll just add a move. And then it all fails for white. So usually not the best plan to try to wedge. Sometimes it's a very good move, but basic case, not really. Okay, so second case, second type of move, knight move. Knight move, notice if black plays here, we have a nobi and a kosumi, so it cannot be cut. Same thing here. Black plays here, is the symmetrical shape, so same thing. Yes, these are not the best shapes, but for the sake of just showing that they cannot be cut, these are fine. If you want better shapes, start thinking about 3-move shapes, like this, or like this, right? But for right now, we're just worried about, basically, can we be cut? So notice, if we play any move, yes, black's best move is probably Hane or Bump, but if we just want to stay connected, just at the minimum, we can Nobi, and then we cannot be cut. So from just staying connected, yeah, now we can't be cut, right? White plays here, we can double Hane, we can extend, lots of stuff, but worst case, just connect. Yeah. Same thing here, worst case, just connect. Can't be cut. Now, we don't always, just connecting is not enough to win a game of Go, but it's a foundational part of understanding how to develop your groups. So, because if you get cut apart, generally speaking, if it happens and you're not prepared, it's going to be a very hard fight, and then it can be difficult. So we want to understand from the beginning, how can we stay connected, because that'll frame how your opponent tries to cut you to start a fight. Okay, so the only way we can cut a knight move is by attaching here or here. Let's look at this one first. They're actually the same. If we attach here, well, generally the best move is to block. Blocking takes a liberty from white and aims to connect here, right? This is our kosumi shape, but so if we play here next, we're connected, which means to cut us, white has to cut. Now, if you are a little bit of an advanced beginner, you may have heard of what's called a ladder. A ladder is a repeating shape, something that AI is very bad at. And it goes like this. I'm actually started playing it. And notice, I'll just back up a second. We Atari towards the long edge. This is a general concept in Go. You want to Atari towards where you're stronger, and these stones have more liberties. We Atari back, right? And by Ataring in this zigzag pattern that kind of looks like a staircase or a ladder, white is permanently in a position where white has 2 liberties, 1 liberty, 2 liberties, 1 liberty, 2 liberties, take away 1, 2 liberties, take away 1. And eventually white will run into the side, and then we can capture it. Because at the side is not giving white more liberties, so white has 1, white still has 1. Oh, and then we take it. So this shape already we can see, oh, there's a bit of an advantage because there's a ladder that white needs to work. And the same is true on the other side, right? It's the same shape, just rotated around, and there's a ladder here. When you're learning, one of the easiest things to do to improve, start recognizing the different way ladders can form. So this shape, maybe you even see this shape. Oh, this is a ladder too. White runs out, you can ladder this way, or you can ladder this way. Now, ladder doesn't always work, but you should notice that. So let's say the ladder doesn't work here. Maybe there's a white stone up here, right? Stopping, does that stop it? Yes, stops it. Stopping this ladder. Well, but we can stretch, and now we're threatening to net, right? So white has to now save this stone in an awkward fashion. Usually this is bad shape, but the other shapes are not great here either, usually like this. There's some tesuji, right? Special moves we can play like this. But the point is, we can still create a fight here, and that might be good, and we're still threatening something. If you can keep threatening something, the fight usually will be good for you. So if we go here, right, we're threatening to capture, and maybe this was enough. Maybe we got a couple extra stones here. Maybe we had some back so that we can use these to make up for this cutting point weakness, and then we take care of our other group, right? The point is, there are conditions that have to be met, but usually if you're playing a knight move or a one space jump, you're coming from a group of stones, and so when your opponent tries to cut, it's going to be a crosscut fight. When the crosscut fight happens, then you have to be able to navigate it in a way that will be beneficial to you. Otherwise, you should have added a move earlier or not played the knight move. So, knight move and one space jump, 2 most fundamental shapes. And I want you to notice something. Generally, people say don't run with the knight move, and that knight moves are better for attacking. There is some truth in that, but it's not entirely true. What is really at the core of this, just for a little bit of discussion, with the knight move, there is 2 crosscuts, and your opponent gets to choose what crosscut happens, right? If white goes here, the crosscut will be these 4. And if white goes here, the crosscut will be on the other side. So in the case of the knight move can be very good for surrounding or moving diagonally, where the one space jump can't. But it's a little more fixed, a little more rigid, in the sense that your opponent can choose between 2 crosscuts. And remember, with the one space jump, when there's only one way to cut it with the wedge, now we get to choose where that crosscut is, because we're the one playing the Atari, and we're the one choosing which side to defend on, where the other side becomes the crosscut. So one space jump, more defensive, but knight move has a lot of advantages for other reasons, such as coming around a group. So just keep that in mind. Now, the 2 fast moves. And the fast moves are not as strong, but they are faster. They cover more space. So that's the 2 space jump. Notice we can 2 space jump in any direction. All these hangma you can do in any direction. All these movements, right? You can 1 space jump in any way. You can kusumi in any way. We can nobi, right? But 2 space jump, it's faster, meaning it goes farther. And this is kind of the upper limit on connections, because any farther than this, we can be split. That doesn't mean going farther is bad. It just means that it's not a basic type of movement. We're not moving from one extension, one stone to another. Instead, this is like an extension. When you get to the realm of 3 or more spaces, this is what Go players call extensions. It's a little bit arbitrary, but the basic idea is if you have a 3 space, if your opponent comes in, there's no guaranteed way in general to connect, and the fighting is much more difficult. Notice that this stone doesn't have to touch any of the white stones, so it has more breathing room. If you're within the 2 space, in order to cut it, you're going to have to touch a stone. And so now that stone has a lot less breathing room, a lot less liberties, a lot less space to work with. So once we get beyond the realm of 2 spaces, 3 spaces becomes entirely different kind of fighting, entirely different kind of situation. Normally, these do not become cross-cut fights. They become running fights where you're trying to surround or get ahead of the other stone from one side or the other. And this is a completely different type of game. But notice, when I'm trying to come around, I'm still using my basic shapes. And when black's running, still basic shapes. Because if black went farther, right, like 3 spaces, oh, it gets cut. Oh, wait, but this is not a basic shape either. This is called elephant's eye. Oh, that can get cut too. Notice how the fighting from like going farther and everything, that creates a lot of cutting points. So maybe instead of this, I just play the Kosumi. Now I'm connected here, and I'm connected with these two. And in a very broad sense, I'm making 2 large knight moves with this one. Now we haven't talked about large knight moves, but large knight moves, they're kind of stretching the outer limits of our connection, but they still have some connection, because when black tries to push, we can hane, and look, again, Kosumi, 1 space jump. Now, of course, you might notice, when we talked about Kosumi before, we said it couldn't be cut. But it's black's turn, black can cut. So this kind of fighting, right, we were talking about the basic shapes for setting up a position. When the fighting breaks out, you don't have the time necessarily to move with things. But it's just general concept, general things to keep in mind. So when you're starting out, just try to stick to the 6 basic shapes. So let's continue with the 2 space jump for a sec. If we want to cut it, notice there's 2 ways, but really one way is much preferred. The less common way, peep and then wedge, right? This makes it a 1 space jump, and then the only way to cut a 1 space jump is to wedge. And when they wedge, well, worst we can start a fight by cutting if we think the fight will be good. But if it's not, we can answer, they kind of have to save the zone, we protect the cut. Oh look, it's another ladder shape. So that's promising, right? That might be another condition that white needs in order for this fight to at least get off the ground. This is very uncommon though. The much more common way is to attach here or here. They're the same move, right? Just flipped. And the idea is that we're breaking black's line of sight. Notice, black has to hane. Black extends, we just go up. And now there's no way for these to connect. Right? They can start a cut, it'll be a cross-cut fight, but they can't directly connect. So, black hanes, white hanes. Black would like to split white, right? We don't want to keep white connected and leave ourselves with a bunch of cutting points. This is possible sometimes, but I would say it's the exception rather than the rule. So we'll cut, white extends, and now look, here's our cross cut. So again, remember, white got to choose where to attach, but when black could hane on this side, and the cross cut forms on the bottom part. So white could choose a little bit where the cross cut forms, but black can also fight back and say, oh well, maybe this cross cut is better, and black can defend, and so this is cut, right? It becomes a cross cut like this. So cross cuts are kind of the heart of the local fighting. There's generally 2 types of fighting. There's the cross cut fight and the running fight. So choosing where the cross cut happens, that's kind of like the secret or the inner part of the connection. But no, so black's 2 space extension to some extent is good. Now, what you might wonder though, the reason 2 space extension is considered a little bit weak is this move. If we could change this move, we would really like it to be something like here or like here if we're trying to come around one of the groups. So just keeping that in mind, that move's a little bit inefficient, and that's why the 2 space jump is thought to be a little bit weaker in connection than the other moves. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's actually quite good. It's I recommend it. But that's just why it's a little bit not quite as efficient if you get into that fighting. And last one, knight move, a large knight move. Large knight move is very simple. Only way to cut, have to play an attachment. But attachment's sort of awkward because we end up with two good shapes for white. This way is very rare to do, but it's possible. You have this crosscut. And if you crosscut immediately, that's fine too, but you're going to end up in this kind of fighting, which is also possible. The way that's much more common, though, is to go from the angle like this. Black will block to try to connect, and then we can cut like this. So white can decide, this large knight move almost always has the same crosscut. It's the diagonal points from the original large knight move. Let me just point those out. Those are the vital points and weak points of this, where they can be cut. So, notice, again, there's two ladders, ladder shape and ladder shape. Those are very important to recognize when you're starting to think about fighting. And so this one, again, has anytime you have a knight move or large knight move, the crosscut points are fixed, but black still has some help. Again, if we do a little bit tawari, tawari means to move the stones in a sense. We might say, well, if we had the ladder, we would much prefer this stone maybe to be here, just to catch it, or even up here, and then we could have a fight, right? But this way, it's going to be a bigger fight. So whenever you're dealing with these shapes, we have to take it in the context of which you're playing them, because in the center, most of these fights look pretty, like, you know, okay-ish. They're somewhat even. Of course, black's better because black had the first two moves. But they're like they could happen, right? But in a real game, we typically stick to the side of the board, because then, if people try to cut us, we can drive them down to the side and chase them away around and catch them. So that will take some practice, because there's many kinds of shapes that can happen on the side. But that's why it's very hard in practice to just cut. And that's why we stick to these shapes that strike a good balance of speed and stability. Okay, so to recap, the 6 shapes that I would recommend you stick with as a beginner are the nobi, the kosumi, 1 space jump, knight move, 2 space jump, and large knight move. Now, once you master these, and I'll tell you, high-level players, strong players, we basically stick to just these shapes also. We don't really, these are the basic movement patterns. Sometimes you play the elephant jump, sometimes you play, I don't know, some other stuff. But usually we stick to these. These are the most fundamental shapes. What you'll want to do eventually is start learning, or start thinking about 3 move shapes, right? So like, from a 1 space jump, what's the next good move? You can make another jump, you can play what's called a horse's head, or a 2 space jump, right? Or maybe we have a kosumi. Should we do a 2 space jump? Probably don't want to play this. This looks ugly. And don't want to do this. This looks really ugly. But it's still made up of basic shapes. But once you get these basic ones, you want to start thinking about the three stone shapes. Okay. So thank you so much for watching. I hope it was helpful. And have a great day. Good luck in your games.